A Russian spy ship was found off the coast of Hawaii as former President Medvedev warns nuclear war with NATO. 299 News starts now.
Welcome to the 299 News for Friday, January 20th, 2023. I'm Aiden.
And I'm Matt.
I'm Cole. Boys, I have breaking news. A Russian spy ship was found off the coast of Hawaii. Now, I've been told that Aiden has news about this. He's got more details. So, Aiden, what do you have for us?
A Russian spy ship has been patrolling off the coast of Hawaii, but so far has remained within international waters, according to the Pentagon on Thursday. Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh says we haven't seen any unsafe or unprofessional behavior, and we expect that the Russians will operate within the region in accordance with international law. So what do you guys think?
I think that's a deeper thought or example into like the bigger issue of threats that the NATO has received from Russia. So let's talk about first and Dmitry Medvedev, and then we'll talk more about the U.S. ship in Hawaii. Yeah, more thoughts about that because that goes deeper into what we're talking about. And just quick thoughts about it. I feel like it's not, that is a little sketchy due to what's been going on recently, but it isn't the worst that we've seen. Of course, it could be just something totally normal, but it is with threats that have been occurring. It's pretty sketchy. Yes, Cole.
All right. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev earlier this week warned of a nuclear war being caused by the loss in the war in Ukraine, more specifically targeting the NATO forces who have supplied Ukraine for the entire war. And now that France and Britain have sent tanks to the Ukraine, and U.S. and Germany have contemplated sending tanks to Ukraine. The U.S. has also started training Ukrainian troops on the Patriot missile systems, which could also be crucial to a victory for Ukraine. And the U.S. has also stated that Ukraine might be planning a spring counteroffensive, which has caused Russia to worry a little bit about the up-and-coming war, or well, not really the up-and-coming war, the war that has been going on. But also news this week is that Belarusian soldiers have been found going towards bordering up the Ukrainian border. A huge mass of them. So Western intelligence is thinking that Belarus could also get involved in the war in Ukraine too. Alright, let's see, where can I take this? Belarus.
Can I?
Yeah, you can take it from there.
Yeah, I'll add some stuff and I can throw it back to you. So, to add some more stuff to what Cole was talking about, how Russia's been sorry. I'm trying to organize my thoughts. So I'm going to take it back to the recent tensions that have been going on between NATO and the U.S. So I'm going to read off some...
NATO and Russia or NATO and the U.S.?
NATO and Russia.
Okay.
I said NATO and
U.S.
U.S.
Want to make sure... Yeah.
The recent tensions between... Sorry, misspoke. I'm going to back up a little bit so we can talk about the recent tensions between Russia, NATO, and the U.S. So let me get that. So this information I got from routers.com. I'll read off some quotes from it. There's not actual quotes from people, but just text from the article I read. So the Kremlin chief has sought in recent months to gird Russians from a much tougher battle while promising eventually victory in a war that leaders of the West say they will never let them win. But top Putin allies say the tens of billions of dollars worth of U.S. and European military assistance to Ukraine shows that Russia is now in a confrontation with NATO itself. So this NATO helping Ukraine has, in Russia's perspective, is pulling NATO more into the conflict, which is also at the same time increasing threats of nuclear war from the Kremlin.
Okay, but going off of what Matt said, with NATO sending more and more assistance to Ukraine has almost made it a conflict between the two already. It's so Putin made a statement, I think in either last month or earlier this month, about the Minsk agreement. Do you guys know what the Minsk agreement was of 2015? It's what ended the first Russian-Ukrainian war. It was the agreement in Minsk, Belarus, and what Merkel said about the agreement was that it didn't end the war, but it gave time Ukraine to re-prepare for a war, for the second war. And Putin's claimed that the West and NATO and Ukraine haven't been following the agreements of that treaty by sending assistance and by threatening Russia. Now, for months now, and almost close to a year, NATO's been trying to add Finland and Sweden to NATO, but Turkey has refused to allow them to join NATO for now. But if NATO were to get Finland and Sweden, Putin said that they would immediately become a threat. Finland and Sweden would immediately be put as a threat to Russian security, when he stated before that he doesn't see Finland and Sweden as threats to Russian security at the moment. So, and one last little thing going on. Earlier this week, the Kazakhstan parliament has decided to dissolve completely, meaning that there could be the building of a new government in Kazakhstan completely. Or it'll be moved over to a dictatorship as the Kazakh leader got rid of the parliament. So, my main thoughts go to if a war were to start between NATO and Russia, who do you guys think would have to be the reason it starts, if that makes sense? Do you think NATO would be the first one to launch a strike, or do you think Russia would be the first one to launch a strike?
I would say, since NATO is very reluctant or hesitant to even get into a war, they wouldn't want it, like, if that ball was already dropped and then they're at war with Russia, then I think they wouldn't want to antagonize them even more. So, but Russia, since their rhetoric is to defend their security, then they would probably be the aggressors.
Right.
That's
my theory. I could see that too, just
because if Russia were to launch a strike on NATO, the first thing they would do is they would launch an operation to the Suwalki Gap. I don't know if you guys know what the Suwalki Gap is or not.
I haven't heard that before.
No. Do you know what Kaliningrad is?
I haven't. No.
It's that small strip of Russian land that's owned above Poland. That's separate.
Oh, that. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's called Kaliningrad. The Suwalki Gap is the gap between Kaliningrad and the border of Belarus. It's the small gap between it, and it's very hard to defend lands between the two. So the idea would be that the Russians would close that gap to connect their land, which would also isolate the Baltics at the same time from the rest of NATO, if Sweden and Finland were not to be admitted. So, that's the theory by the Westerners, or the U.S., whoever you want to call it, NATO.
And all the Baltic states, are they a part of NATO?
Yes, all three of them. But so here's the thing. Here's I've, as somebody who pays a lot of attention to this, I've watched a bunch of Putin's speeches just because I'm curious. His claim is that in the 90s, NATO made an agreement not to expand eastward, which they have clearly not followed, according to him, and that they have threatened Russia by admitting Estonia and Latvia, which both border Russia, and Lithuania and Poland, which border Belarus. And if they were to admit Ukraine, then obviously that shares a much larger border with Russia and Belarus. In 2008, when Russia went to war with Georgia, afterwards Georgia cut all relations with Russia, and since then Georgia and NATO, even before the war, Georgia and NATO have become closer allies, but they're not exactly a member. Ukrainian ministers earlier this week said that they're a de facto member of NATO, which is like the middle area between being a member and not being a member. That's where Georgia is, I think, too. Actually, let me look it up. If either one of you want to share your thoughts while I do this.
Do you if war was, and I hope not, if war was to break out between Russia and NATO, do you think Russia would be actually willing to use nuclear weapons, or is that just a tactic to scare the West?
Oh,
Because
that's a tough question. I don't think there's really a right answer. But so Putin's a hardcore nationalist. He's got the ideology of Peter the Great, Tsar Peter the Great, of the 1700s, of making Russia a world power by all means necessary. I gotta show you guys this thing.
and what like, because we've heard for months that if Russia was to lose, then even we heard this today.
Yeah.
If Russia was to lose, then the consequences for the West. Oh wait, what is this?
This is an essay written by Vladimir Putin. This is his essay on why Ukraine should be annexed by Russia. He wrote a freaking essay on it and published it. He goes on to talk about the 9th century of freaking Russian history. He goes on to talk about Kievan Rus and how Ukraine was never a sovereign state, ever. And he compares Ukraine and Russia to here, I'll even quote this for the podcast. Where is it? Just look at how Austria and Germany, the US and Canada live next to each other. Close in ethnic composition, culture, in fact, sharing one language. They remain sovereign states with their own interest, with their own foreign policy, but this does not prevent them from the closest integration or allied relations. They have very conditional, transparent borders, and when crossing them, the citizens feel at home. They create families, study, work, do business. Incidentally, so do millions of those born in Ukraine who now live in Russia. We see them as our own close people. End quote, Vladimir Putin. That right there, from his essay that's written like a frickin' 9th grader, ranting about history on why Ukraine isn't real. Like, what? This man spent all summer being a freaking history nerd just so he could declare a war on a country and think that everybody would be fine with it. Okay? If that does, I don't think that changes. So if he were to launch a nuclear strike, where would he even go? Are you going to go to the US? Are you going to go to the EU? Are you going to go to Ukraine? Are you going to do all three of them at the same time? Because I already think that in Belarus there's been huge upbringings of people saying we don't want to support Russia, obviously, because Belarus is the definition of a third world country. They're under a dictator, and if you're under the age of 28 in Belarus, you've never had another leader than Lukashenko. He's literally been the president for almost 30 years. The 2020 election was clearly rigged because it said Lukashenko got 80% of the vote, even though the actual polls by the West say he only got like 10. But the people are saying no. There's been multiple coup attempts, and Lukashenko had to get rid of elections completely and said that if anything were to happen to him, if he were to die, his son would take over and a council led by 20 of his loyalists. Now, what does this have to do with Russia? Belarus and Russia in 1999 signed an agreement called the Union State, where the idea was that eventually it was signed by both Putin and Lukashenko, who, if you think about it, are both still the leaders almost 23 years later. And they both signed the agreement, and it was the idea that eventually the two would become one country together. Well, it's been 24 years, and the agreement's still on, and they're still not one country. So, good job, guys. Good job. The idea was that they would come up with one currency, one language, one everything. And the one language, that's the part that hangs on with me, is that 80% of adult people in Belarus speak Russian and not the Belarus language, which is, I think, Belarusian, I don't know. But 80% of people now speak Russian. They teach Russian in schools now. It's pretty as dang close as you get to Russia without it being Russia. Their military hasn't changed since 1991 at all. The technology is literally the exact same. So, if Russia is caring about them, and they're saying, oh, they're basically Russia, and does that mean Russia's the same? Because, I mean, Russia is not... It's been shown in the war they're not using nearly enough the same technology that the West has. They're clearly behind. So, my thing is if Russia were to go to war with NATO, I don't know. The question to me would be, how long would it take before the people of Russia did something about it? Would they be fully supportive of this war, or would they be fully against it? Because if they're fully supportive, that changes everything. If they're fully against it, that changes everything. There's not really an in between. I don't see there being an in between. If they fully support, then I think the war will last much longer. If they're not, then there would be coup attempts, rebellions, breakaways. There's already, I mean, Chechnya. If you guys have ever heard of Chechnya, that's a breakaway nation of Russia that's been trying to be free since the 1990s. It hasn't gotten away. Oh, sorry about that. I just ranted for like 10, 15 minutes, didn't I?
No, you're good. You're good. That was good. When you said like how if the Russian people would support a war with NATO, I feel like that would be kind of conflicting ideas, because a lot of Russians, because Russian media is rigged or it's I don't know what the word is. It's mostly appeals to
restricted.
What? Yeah, restricted. Mostly appeals to Russian or Kremlin ideology, or their and
everything that goes on Russian TV has to be approved by Putin or somebody Putin chooses.
Exactly. So that means a lot. So that means there's a lot of sentiment.
So the people don't actually know
NATO.
what's going on with NATO. They don't actually know about it. They just know them as a threat.
Yeah.
So the people are oblivious, but as soon as the people actually see what's going on, that's when everything's going to change. It's going to, if they're ever revealed to what's actually going on, then it's going to change just like that. There's going to be uproars of the younger people. The social media people are going to do their thing. All the political leaders who disagree with him are going to say something. So,
what?
If the people are ever revealed to what's going on, then that's going to change forever what goes on in Russia, and whether Putin or not has control.
And I don't think that it would be revealed anytime soon, since, like you said, it's their media is so restricted that any news into the West is
Now, here's the thing.
Not
We talked about it on the podcast before, but Putin is sick. He's sick, possibly. If he what happens if he dies within the year? Or within this year, next year? What happens then? Because the idea is that he would get to choose a successor. And thoughts are if he were to choose a successor, it's going to be somebody worse than him. Somebody who hates the West even more. Which then, I think, if he dies, Russia will be the instigator of the war. Confirmed, no doubt about it. And if it's somebody who hates the West enough, he will launch a nuclear strike, I believe, on the West. If it's I honestly don't think Putin's going to do it. And I think I think Putin would rely on Kim Jong-un to do that instead. Or Kim Jong-un's sister, depending on what happens. His sister is the heir to the throne right now. So, and she hates the U.S. even more than he does. So,
yeah, Putin, I feel like is too cautious to do something that reckless, such as a nuclear war. It would have to be someone who's totally psychotic and reckless.
Reckless.
Yeah.
Somebody who's oblivious to the results of what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, do I think it's ever going to happen? No, I don't think a nuclear strike is going to be launched within any time within the next year and a half. I just don't see that as a possibility. If Russia were to do it, I would suspect it would be multiple at the same time. It would go in different areas. It would hit all at once, and it would be one foul swoop, and I think that would be it. And they would hope that would be enough to cause for peacekeeping almost. But I don't know. I don't know, so I don't talk to Vladimir Putin. But I can tell you he isn't stupid. So
no, which is why I think he wouldn't commit to such reckless act. And also I feel like it's really just something. The Kremlin is losing, so they're just stomping their feet, yelling, trying to intimidate the West to try to get them to not do it, because they're pretty much in a desperate panic mode right now. So they're willing to threat the West's NATO's worst fear. But Putin, in my opinion, is Putin. Yes, even though how corrupt he is, and he's not a good person in this, of course, but he's not dumb either. I would be surprised if he said, "Yeah, let's nuke NATO or like any Western nations, including even the U.S." Like it would be such a terrible. It would be a terrible decision.
Let me ask you. You're knowledgeable on the concept of ideologies, right? Like, you know what ideologies are?
Yeah.
You know, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think Putin's ideology is?
Like what he be more like what he wants for Russia.
Like communism's an ideology, fascism's an ideology.
Okay, so now, yeah,
liberalism, conservatism, socialism, that kind of stuff.
I don't.
Mafia state. That's I
feel like
moderate.
He does. Well, I don't know if he wants to be, complete is downright. I just it's communism. I think he wants a strong Russian nation. We're a dominant nation in the world, and he is nationalism. He's a nationalist, and That's an ideology I think he has, and he uses the Soviet Union as an example or a model to what he wants Russia to be, and uses the mafia to get that.
Here's an interesting quote. I'm going to pull out another quote by Putin. This is his 2005 State of the Union address that he made. I gotta find it real quick. So he made an interesting reference to the Soviet Union. A quote that I found. Alright, I'll pull it up.
And also,
that.
and before you bring that up, I also want to backtrack a little bit when you talked about how the relationship with his essay between Ukraine and Russia, and how that similarity is a good excuse for them to unify. That is very similar to Hitler's rhetoric during World War II. How like the countries of like Austria or like Czechoslovakia or Poland, places like that, who not all of them are ethnically were not ethnically German, but a good majority of them. That from the response to like the League of Nations to when that happened was not
nothing.
Yes, really, it was really nothing. But it wasn't it wasn't like a definite excuse. Like, oh yeah, go ahead, that no problem. Do it. Like, yes, the League of Nations was very passive to Hitler doing that, but they weren't like, yeah, that's a great idea, do it. You know? So I feel like that's the same thing for Ukraine. Just because they have the same, like, they're cultural-wise, there's the same culture-wise, that does not give it an exact excuse to eliminate the independence or freedom of someone else. Because you have it has to be a mutual relationship.
All right, here's the quote I wanted to show you. So I got the quote now. In his 2005 State of the Union address, he says, "Let me remind you again how modern Russian history began. First of all, it should be acknowledged, and I have spoken of this before, that the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century, and for the Russian people it was a real drama. Tens of millions of our citizens and fellow countrymen found themselves outside of the Russian Federation." Now, going off of exactly like what you said, where Hitler used the same justification for his wars in Austria and in Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, where he said that it was German people needing to be a part of Germany. It almost feels like the same exact thing. But I want to specifically talk about how he says the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 1900s. And his father served for the Soviet Navy during World War II and the siege of Leningrad. So it almost seems like he's just forgetting that World War I and World War II occurred in the 1900s. The 20th century.
He's making his issue more bigger than everyone else's. And what was I was thinking before?
You went back to the essay.
Yeah, he's forgetting about the perspective of other nations, particularly in like Eastern Europe, who are under the jurisdiction of the Soviet Union during the Cold War, and how those nations have progressed after the fall of the Soviet Union. So he's saying it's the worst catastrophe, but
it's the worst catastrophe for Russia.
Yes.
Not for anybody else. It's because only Russia that was a catastrophe for.
And he says, however, thousands or millions of Russian people just dropped from the Soviet Union. Well,
but
that's not necessarily a bad. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it's saying like they're these countries were abandoned or literally left in the dirt when really not all of them were.
Some of them clearly have been. Some of
Yes.
them are struggled. Some of them have struggled to move on.
Mhm.
Some of them, but mostly the European ones have moved forward from it. Georgia has moved forward. Ukraine clearly has moved forward, which he doesn't really like. The Baltic
Yeah.
states have definitely progressed really well. I mean, they're already part of NATO. They're part of the EU, I think, too. So, like countries like Belarus, Kazakhstan, really all the Stan nations, and probably Armenia. Those ones have struggled to pick themselves back up because they were so reliant on the Russian economy.
Yeah.
So,
I
I think we gotta pause it there. We can come back to this next week, but I want to make sure we have time for our sports news and our tech news for this week. So, yeah, we went on for that for like 30 minutes. So,
Yeah, so
I
we'll
don't
start
want
with
it to be.
sports news.
You want me to start with sports news?
Yeah, I'm still working.
All right.
on
Well,
tech
breaking news in sports: the Cardinals are not in the playoffs. They are not moving on. It's insane.
Sorry.
All right. So for
I am
sports,
angry
welcome.
at you. Okay.
All right, so for sports news this week, we had the NFL wild card games this week. The 49ers beat the Seahawks 41-23, and on that same night, the Jaguars were down by 27 at one point and made a huge comeback to win 31-30 when being down 27-0 at one point. And the Bills barely beat the Dolphins, who were playing on their third string quarterback Skylar Thompson. The Giants upset the Vikings 31-24. The Ravens take a really bad loss to the Bengals, and the Cowboys dominate the Buccaneers on Monday Night Football. So now our bracket now looks like this. The Chiefs are going to play are going to host the Jaguars, and the Bills are going to have their rematch with the Bengals, which is probably going to be the storyline for this week, Bills Bengals. Because unfortunately, the last time Bills Bengals played, it was postponed, canceled after the injury by Damar Hamlin, who did make it to the locker room this week to watch the Bills Dolphins game. So he is in good condition. He's up, moving, discharged, everything. He's back to, not going to say normal, but he's in a much better state than he once was. We got Eagles, Giants in a division matchup where the Eagles are going to be the home team, and Cowboys are going to San Francisco. So, who were your guys' Super Bowl picks? Are they still in or not? I know I picked the Bills. I can't remember. Matt picked the Cowboys, so they're still in. And Aiden, I forgot who you picked. So
I think I picked either the 49ers or the Bills.
okay. So oh, you're right, because you had the 49ers, and then you wanted to switch it over to the Bills, and I said you couldn't switch it.
Are the
So-
49ers still in?
They're still in. They're going to play the Cowboys. And so those 4 games are going to be this weekend. Starting tomorrow, actually, on Saturday. We got 2 games on Saturday, 2 games on Sunday, where you can watch them on NBC, where you can watch Chiefs, Jaguars on NBC, Eagles, Giants on Fox, 49ers, Cowboys on Fox, and Bills, Bengals, which is the headliner for this week on CBS. So, all right, and that's your sports news for this week. Boom, yeah, boom. Good job, guys. Tech news.
Tech news?
Tech news.
All right.
Technologically news.
Yeah, we'll get started. All right. So I think a lot of people have been hearing about this the last week, but a lot of major tech companies like Meta and Amazon have been making major job cuts. And earlier this week, Microsoft announced it will be cutting off 10,000 jobs due to the current state of the economy and the overhiring of employees during the pandemic. It is the largest. It is the largest layoff the company has endured in 8 years. The last time they did that was back in 2014 and 2015. Also, Google's parent company Alphabet has announced this morning that 12,000 jobs will be cut. Google CEO Sundar Pichai said that the company needs to focus on more important things like artificial intelligence. Also earlier this week, Discord announced it is acquiring the social media platform Gas, an app where teenagers compliment each other. It's a nice departure from the negative aspects that, or consequences rather, that other social media apps have had on teens. And the acquisition comes at a time where the Supreme Court is holding social media platforms accountable by challenging their immunity from content liability.
What platform did Gas come from, or what social media platform?
I think Gas was its own platform. It was like a small startup, and Discord just brought it up. So.
Oh, Discord brought it up. Yeah, I had tried that app. Yeah. Protests in front of the German chancellor's in Berlin chant "Free the leopards now." Oh,
Leopards.
Leopards. Okay,
Leopards.
sorry.
Leopards.
I was like, what the heck is that?
And that's the tanks. Their tanks are leopards.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes.
Anyway, so that happened.
Sorry to interrupt.
Very good.
We can talk it.
Moving on. We're going to talk about some other things that have been happening in the news. On Thursday, a leaked spec sheet from Verizon reveals the Galaxy S23's specs and prices. It shows that the phones will remain at the same prices as last year's S22 phones, contrary to some other rumors that have been going around, and that the specs will be getting a bit of an increase. Battery life and storage are expected to see an increase. The base model will go from 3,700 to 3,900 milliamp hours, and the Plus model will go from 4,500 milliamp hours to 4,700 milliamp hours. The Ultra model, however, will continue to have a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. Now, storage-wise, the vanilla S23 will have 128 gigs of onboard storage and 8 gigs of RAM, while the S23 and the S23 Plus and the S23 Ultra are going to have 256 gigs of base storage. So that will be nice to see, considering that 128 gigs these days is kind of getting tight. But that's just me. There have been some things going on in terms of people getting hacked. Yum Brands, which owns Taco Bell, KFC, and Pizza Hut, announced on Thursday it was the victim of a ransomware attack that caused its chains in the UK to close down. Which kind of sucks, because now the hacker can't order pizza for dinner. Wonder why. And Reuters this morning announced that T-Mobile's suffered a data breach, exposing 37 million accounts and their names and contact information. The company claims that no financial information was compromised, but said it will notify any affected customers. The FCC has launched its own investigation, and during this morning's trade, the company's share fell 1%. All right. Now, this isn't recent. This isn't today or yesterday, but this is like news that came out this week. I want to get you guys' thoughts on this. So obviously we know about Minecraft, and you know how some people like to play Minecraft.
Yeah.
So, a Russian teen, he decided to hold these, he put up leaflets about political prisoners on a real-world FSB building in the city of Kansk, if that's how you pronounce it. Two were given probation, but Uvarov, I don't know how to say their names, I'm probably botching it. He denied, he pled not guilty. He was sentenced to 5 years for having held, like, the political prisoners, and, like, it's like a Minecraft terrorism thing, I guess, like.
Wait, was it 5 years by Russian jail or by U.S. jail?
Russian jail, I believe.
Oh, that doesn't surprise me, though.
Yeah, and he's told the court, "I am not a danger to society. I think 5 years in prison is too cruel. I repented, corrected myself, and no longer plan to come into the view of authorities and break the law." Really, he was just sending a message. He wasn't actually threatening to act on his action. There are 3 14-year-olds, okay? And they were detained because they put up leaflets about political prisoners on a real-world FSB building. Two of them got probation, but one of the kids was sentenced to 5 years behind bars. He pled not guilty, and he's the one that's saying, "I'm not a danger to society." Now, I think this is like something they did on a Minecraft world. They were blowing up a digital recreation of the FSB building, and they were charged with terror offenses.
So what is the FSB building?
That's a good question. I should look it up real quick. I should probably know.
If it's a political building, then it would make more sense why Russia's gonna put him in jail.
It's the Lubyanka building. It's the headquarters of a company called FSB. It's in Moscow.
Okay. So that makes sense.
Yeah. But he wasn't threatening to actually carry out the terrorist attack.
Yeah, I think what would have been fair is if he was put on house arrest.
Yeah.
Maybe
The other
instead.
kids got probation, but this one
probation.
kid got 5 years behind bars, which is really weird.
What's probation? House arrest?
Kind of. They let you out.
Yeah, it's
They're like extremely limited where they're allowed to go and where they can do.
Yeah.
They're essentially free, but they are given like your probation officer. They have to have like check-ins every once in a while, and they're limited to what they can do. Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's what I would have put him on house arrest instead for like a year or two.
How old was this?
14.
They're all 14. They're all 14.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so see, there's the thing, because the Russian judicial system, is one of the highest percentage of what's it called, calling people guilty almost of charging people. 99% of cases that go to the judicial courts, 99% are considered guilty of whatever they did. So, and as we can tell, the punishments are pretty extreme. As we saw earlier with Brittany Griner getting 10 years in prison for having drugs. Understandable. A little bit more understandable, but still it was felt like a lot, even to the U.S. We're sending a 14-year-old kid to jail for 5 years for blowing up a building in Minecraft now, which makes absolutely no sense. So, by the time he gets out, he's going to have to do high school and college, possibly, because he's in freaking middle school right now.
They're getting towards the end of it.
Yeah.
And, my thought from it is compared to like threats of like even that was a 14-year-old doing that in Minecraft. I guess that is technically slightly like Cole said, it's slightly understandable to prosecute him, but not so with such a harsh punishments. And if that happened in like in the U.S. or like in then the punishments wouldn't be as harsh. Like maybe like Cole said, like house arrest or something like that. Especially the 14-year-old with like a minor. And if
I don't even think the U.S. would do anything.
Probably
to be
not.
honest. Because I bet you there's some kid who's gone on Minecraft and has blown up some twin towers. I'm gonna be honest with you. You can cut that part out of the podcast if you think it's appropriate. But I am guaranteeing
but you're
you
telling
that
the truth. There are people that have done that on Minecraft.
I know that there's people that have done that. You could probably pull it up on YouTube right now.
Yeah.
Probably.
I guarantee you. If you search on YouTube, you can find it there. And that kid probably had nothing done to him. The U.S. doesn't care.
And I feel like I've seen a video in Minecraft of something like that happening.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was a large tower or something. I could be just brain farting or whatever, but
Or like you could probably see it on GTA or whatever too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, people do.
Probably.
It just proves the point that Russia's a police state now. It's a mafia state.
And yes, exactly, and that goes back to how we were talking about with this like strong nationalist ideology that Russia has adopted. So now like any small offenses are blown out of proportion. like with just like blowing up a state. I don't know what was it? The
That he
what
blew
was
up
the
the
building?
FSB building, the
FSB.
FSB.
Even something like that is treated as serious because it threatens like Russian, or it diminishes Russian dominance. Kind
Earlier
of.
this week, I wrote an essay on whether or not I consider Putin to be a dictator or not. Um, I stated in my essay that I believe that Russia is very similar to George Orwell's 1984. Where I don't know if you guys have ever read that or not, but it's a very good book. Um, Basically, it's dictator, and you're not allowed to say anything bad about him, or else you're caught by a secret police where you are tortured, or and then you're set back out into society and told not to do it again. So the I don't want to spoil the story for any of the viewers, but basically that's where I feel like Russia is at the moment. Where you do anything small, like you say something like Putin's hair looks stupid, you're probably going to jail for like 500 years. You're probably killed on the spot, and your family's probably killed on the spot just because you said his hair looks dumb. All right, over to history section.
History.
Yes. So, all right. Today we're going to be talking about the French Revolution. We're going to, since this is a very large topic, we're going to break it up into parts in this episode. So, I'm going to talk about kind of the build up to it, the backgrounds, the first acts of rebellion, kind of like the first revolution that occurred.
First revolution.
And then Cole will talk about the second half and
We'll both share our 2 cents about whatever. About
what was it called? The Reign of Terror, stuff like that. Do you have
Reign of Terror?
Yeah. All right. So
Reign of Terror.
I'm going to I'm going to read. I'm going to wrote an essay. I'm going to read it off. Call Aiden if I go too fast, or just let me know. I'll try to explain it the best of my ability. But all right. So here we go. So, the French Revolution was a rebellion led by the bourgeoisie, wealthy member, to oust the monarchy of France. Many peasants and serfs, which serfs were essentially the peasants of French society.
Huh. Interesting that you use the term serf, huh?
And as well
it's the
as
Russian term for slavery.
That's interesting.
Matt, you're Russian?
No.
Wait,
no.
Matt. I wonder you know so much about what's going on.
He's a little too German, though. He's a little too German. Let's be real.
And Matt is way too German to have any sort of liking for Russia.
Yeah, not after what happened last time.
I was gonna say, it's my theory that every single German hates every single Russian. Just because of
after Stalingrad, they just
Yeah. No, well, they hated each other at Stalingrad. That's the only reason why so many people died, is because they just hated each other so much.
Yeah.
Basically,
And then
Hitler and Stalin created the biggest rivalry between two nations in the history of the world. I was actually wrong in that that's actually second behind Britain and France. Obviously, that's the largest rivalry in history. My apologies to everybody who's offended by my comments.
Yeah, essentially. All right. So let's go. Many peasants and serfs, as well as middle-class members, were growing tired of the feudal system that had been in place since the Middle Ages. Wealthy merchants, manufacturers, and professionals desired recognition to enter political positions, while the serfs, which were the peasants of French society, wanted social reform. At the time, peasants were limited to the rights of ownership of their land due to the Middle Age social and political system that still framed the societal norms. Furthermore, new developments in standards of living and education were growing with the introduction of new social theologies. However, the construct of feudalism continued to deter reform. So essentially, this France still inherited this old system of like political and social system, while also growing in like theology and different improvements in society, in different like technology and stuff like that. So it was it was an imbalance, social and political wise.
Good question.
Yeah.
Do you talk about the 7 Years' War at all throughout this?
No.
Oh, because your history teacher taught me that the 7 Years' War was one of the biggest causes of the French Revolution. Because France lost and because they had to keep raising taxes.
Oh yes, yeah, that's true. No, yes, I do. Because the French Revolution
No, you can go ahead. If you talk
well,
about it, go ahead.
The 7 Years' War and the French and Indian War
They're the same
created debt. Yeah, the same thing. Created debts and expenses for the French, and with inflation that was incurring, they taxed the middle class, which I will go into that later.
Bourgeoisie.
And as a result, the bourgeoisie, supported by the peasantry, led a revolt against the Echin regime to overthrow the monarchy to establish a modernized republic. And side note, the Echin regime was a political and social system of France from the Middle Ages to the Revolution in 1789. It was divided.
Romanovs? Is that like the Romanovs kind of? Is that like the name of the dynasty? Like
pretty much. It was also called the Parisian social construct. Parisians were the inhabitants of Paris. And this social system was divided into 3 estates. The first estate, which was the clergy, the second estate, which was the nobility, and the third estate was pretty much everyone else, essentially. And correct me on this, Cole. Was the third estate did that include both the bourgeoisie as well as the peasantry? That's first. Okay.
I have the numbers for how many people were in each class. If you want me to read those off, just for a comparison.
Yeah.
Unless you have it. So
you got
the clergy was only made up of 100,000 people. They came with important privileges, and they only had about 10% of the land of France. The second estate, which was the noblemen and women, was about 400,000 people, so about 500,000 combined between the two of them. And they owned 25% of the land, and they had of France, and they had hunting rights, and they were allowed to tax peasants for their profit, and gave them honorific privileges. But everybody else, the commoners, 25 million people compared to the other two classes, or 25 million in total. 24.5 million came from the third estate. They got 65% of the land, and they had really no privileges compared to that. I'll leave that back to you. I'll push it back over to you. But I just figured that so you could get a comparison of how much larger the third estate is from everybody else.
Yeah. The era of enlightenment, as would be called, introduced new concepts to the educated class regarding societal systems that threatened the Echin regime. Masonic lodges, agricultural societies, and reading rooms were significant societies of thought that challenged the political system of France. So in these groups, new ideas were emerging that were used as concepts to improve the social and political system of France. In addition, the improvement in standards of living and mortality rate created issues regarding advancements in food production to accommodate the growing population. And talk about more about this. The economy of France at this time was already a huge issue. Inflation, debt, and a boom of population increase created a lot of expenses that France was barely able to keep up with. They also, in France, its population was the largest in Europe with 26 million. This turned out to be a major problem as the country was already burdened with heavy expenditures caused by the past wars of the 18th century. In response, the monarchy decided to tax the nobles and educated class to compensate for their losses. Other countries attempted this, including the Sugar and Stamp Acts imposed on the American colonists by the British. The aristocracy of France particularly responded in a similar way to the Americans through revolution. Later, I'm going to compare the the kind of concepts that kickstarted the French Revolution, as well as the American Revolution. And I have a tab open for the Declaration of Independence, and I could read some parts from that if you want me to.
From the U.S. or both are French?
From the U.S.
Okay.
I can read parts from the Declaration of Independence. So acts of rebellion. So I'm going to talk about how it broke off into more. We're going to talk more about the specifics of the revolution. 2 years before the revolution would officially begin, the Controller General of Finances in France, Charles Alexander du Calonne, rallied the noblemen representatives of the bourgeoisie in February of 1787 to consider reforms on taxation. They agreed to increase taxes on the privileged class to eliminate the budget deficit, which engendered backlash from the States General, representing the clergy, aristocracy, and the third estate. The Estates General was pretty much the legislative body of France, and if I'm wrong on that, you can correct. But
What part? Wait, which estate?
the Estates General.
Oh, okay. I have that it was representatives from all three estates. One-fourth came from the first, 1/4 came from the second, and 1/2 came from the third.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for interrupting.
Very good. Okay. The aristocratic bodies of Parliament were unsuccessful in their efforts to divert taxation in May of 1788. However, Louis XVI decided to reconvene the Estates General on May 5th, 1789, after unrest in numerous places in France. He also decided to grant freedom of the press, which created criticism towards the monarchy and advocated for construction of the state. So, if I went too fast on that, I'll kind of do a little go back a little on that. Okay. What really kickstarted the revolution was when the States General reconvened at Versailles. They were immediately faced with an issue of voting procedures. How many votes should each state get? The first and second estates wanted to vote by estate rather than vote by head, which would have given the third estate the majority. However, the aristocracy decided to vote per estate, giving the clergy and nobility the advantage. This dispute caused deputies of the third estate to declare themselves the National Assembly shortly after, separating themselves from the other estates. Royal officials then locked the National Assembly from their regular meeting, so they decided to occupy the king's indoor tennis court, the Jeu de Paume, and swore an oath not to disperse from their position until a new constitution was written. The king conceded and ordered the entire assembly into the National Constituent Assembly on July 9th, 1789. Side note, the National Assembly was a revolutionary assembly formed by the representatives of the Third Estate, formerly known as the National Constituent Assembly until the founding of the Legislative Assembly on September 30th, 1791. This new council would not have the support of the monarchy, however, and there were attempts to actually to dissolve it. All right, and so due to the neglect of a lack of food for the peasantry or the Parisians in particular, which were the inhabitants of France, the fear of the privileged class overthrowing the third estate, many rebelled, known as the Great Fear of July, and subsequently caused peasants to rise against their lords. In order to satisfy this rebellion, the National Assembly decided to decree the abolition of the feudal regime of the tithe on August 4th, 1789. On the 26th, the Assembly introduced the Declaration of Rights of Man and of Citizen, which proclaimed liberty, equality, and the right to rebel against oppression. King Louis failed to authorize the decrees of the declaration, which engendered another rebellion. The rebellions forced the royal family back to Paris from Versailles, where they were conjuring up a new constitution. And what I think would be interesting to compare is Declaration of Rights of Man and of Citizen, as well as Declaration of Independence from the American Revolution. So Cole, do you want to go into the other half?
Second revolution of France.
Yeah.
Yes, we can take it from here.
And
So-
actually, could you do you have any like more specifics on the Declaration of Man and of Citizen?
The Declarations of Rights of Man.
Yeah,
I
Rights
have
of
the
Man.
Declaration of Rights of Man. Let's see. Here's the thing I wrote down. Provided the rights of every man and made them equal, the question of how much power the king would retain went unanswered. And then this led to the storming of the Bastille. So about 7,000 women marched to Versailles and protested and killed royal bodyguards. The church was unable to give money and to feed the poor, and children couldn't be fed. The royal family was forced to leave. And they fled outside of the country, where I think, if I remember correctly, they went to Prussia, because they either went to Prussia or Austria, but they were immediately returned. They were told they cannot come in here. They were asking for help. Where the Declaration of Filnitz was signed in 1791, which stated that Austria and Prussia would get involved in France under certain circumstances. And this backfired as Austria and Prussia would fight against the Queen and King eventually to overthrow them and help in France. If the royal family was touched, then Prussia also threatened the people that they would take Paris, but obviously they never did that. So the Second Revolution, the storming of the Bastille, where the women march because they were unfed, and the royal family was just spending time in the palace at Versailles, just partying all day instead. An interesting fact, going back to the economic status, 50% of the taxes that were paid went to interest, 25% went to military, 6% went to whatever happened at Versailles, only 19% of taxes went back to the people in buying anything for what happened within the society. So when the people overthrew the king, which is what they end up doing, they end up going. They get rid of the king. They get rid of the great Marie Antoinette that everybody loved so much. That's sarcasm. They hated her. So they end up cutting off King Louis XVI's head, and this was different at the time. It wasn't. There were democracies just becoming a new thing almost at this time, and Maximilien Robespierre becomes the new leader of France through this revolution. And one of the first things he does is he says that all unmarried young men were subject to the draft, which was not a very good choice by him. Robespierre takes anybody who criticizes his government, considers him soft, any radicalists, he sends them to the guillotine, even though, let's be honest, he sounds like a radicalist. So, eventually, he, what's it called? The other political leaders, his helpers, I guess, as side people, he realized that they're unsure of who's next, because it's almost like the Great Purge. You don't know who's gonna get. This is almost the first Great Purge, where he just gets rid of anybody who whether they're accused of criticizing him or if they didn't actually criticize him, they're killed anyway. Anybody with any sort of power is killed. So it's almost believed that they're not sure who's next. Now, it didn't go the way that happened in Russia, though. The other political leaders ended up cutting off Robespierre's head. He was then executed for his treason, I think is what they called it. Treason for killing other people with power. But the Directory took over, which was the middle class. It was just middle class, which I wrote down was the original revolutionist, still with the original ideals of the revolution, almost getting rid of this reign of terror that it was called.
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
What could you back to? Who committed the Reign of Terror?
Robespierre.
Robespierre. And
Robespierre.
And who were his following?
But who followed him?
Yes.
Nobody. That's why it was the Reign of Terror. He didn't get much support. The idea was that he was preserving the revolution by getting rid of those who disagreed. And obviously, all the peasants are uneducated. They actually don't know what's going on for the most part. Because this is an era before the news becomes big. If you were working on a farm, you had no idea that Robespierre even was a person. So whenever everybody gets their heads cut off, it's like, oh, okay. I don't even know who that guy is. Because you probably heard about it months later than it actually happened. So, yeah.
Okay, that makes more sense then.
So the Directory takes over. It's a group of middle-class original revolutionists. I think 5 of them. And they end up making the decisions, and they work on creating a new constitution to reduce unemployment in France. So that was the main idea behind it, and to restore the original ideals of the French Revolution. But some general that worked for France, named Napoleon Bonaparte, saw the Directory as weak, and decided that with his rise to power, he could make France strong again. He was another strong nationalist. Since we're talking a lot about nationalism today.
So I'm guessing this is right around where Napoleon takes over?
Yes. Napoleon builds up, and he basically signs the Concordat of 1801, that's got nothing to do with this. He takes over France in the late 1790s. He doesn't overthrow the Directory violently or anything like that, but he takes advantage of it and makes himself the sole leader of France, the emperor, as he would later be crowned.
So how long did the Directory last before Napoleon?
Not very long.
Like maybe a couple years or something like that.
Maybe 5 at most. Let me see. Let me see what year Robespierre died. Because I know what year because Napoleon takes over right before the 1800s. Robespierre is killed in 94, and Napoleon is over in let's see, ruler of France in 99. So 5 years. So there you go. The Directory lasted for about 5 years. Napoleon takes over, and do you think I should stop it there, and then
yeah,
we come back and then next, because this is already running really long. So
yeah,
next week when we'll talk about Napoleon, what he did to revolutionize France, and the Napoleonic Wars. We'll touch on those. So that's it for us. The outro stuff by people.
Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with the Napoleonic Wars. I think about that for a second. Bye. Are we done waving? Ugh.
All right.
Are we good?